My child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at a time when your heart has been asking questions your lips have not known how to form. Do not rush past this moment. Something has shifted in a place you cannot see, and the person whose heart has been connected to yours in ways neither of you fully understood has just discovered something about you that changed the way they see everything. They did not expect the truth to touch them so deeply. They did not expect one small realization to unlock so many buried emotions. Yet the moment it became clear, their defenses weakened, their thoughts grew quiet, and something they had been holding back for far too long began rising to the surface. What happens from here will not unfold the way either of you once imagined, because the truth they discovered was not simply about what you did or did not do. It was about who you have been all along. There have been moments when you wondered why this connection felt so complicated. You sensed warmth, then distance. You noticed tenderness, then silence. At times it seemed as though your soulmate could see straight into you, and at other times it felt as though they had placed a wall between you and everything they felt. You questioned whether you had misread the signs. You wondered whether you mattered to them as much as they mattered to you. And there were nights when you tried to convince yourself that perhaps the safest thing was simply to stop caring. But somewhere beneath all those questions, your spirit kept sensing that the story had not finished revealing itself. That feeling was not there to trap you in waiting. It was there because something remained unresolved, and now the truth behind that unresolved chapter has begun to come into the light. Your soulmate once carried an idea about you that was incomplete. It may have come from something they heard, something they assumed, something they observed from a distance, or something their own fear convinced them was true. They saw one piece of your story and mistook it for the whole picture. They noticed your silence and thought it meant indifference. They saw your strength and assumed you did not need reassurance. They noticed the way you stepped back when things became uncertain and interpreted it as rejection, when in reality you were trying to protect your heart from becoming another place where you had to fight to be understood. They did not fully know the battles behind your calmness. They did not see every moment when you chose dignity instead of explaining yourself. And because they did not understand those hidden details, they built conclusions in the spaces where truth had not yet arrived. But something has happened. A detail surfaced. A conversation took place. A memory returned with new meaning. Perhaps they heard something from someone who knew more than they realized. Perhaps they noticed a pattern that suddenly connected all the moments they had misunderstood. Perhaps they looked back over an old message, a forgotten interaction, or a decision you once made, and for the first time they saw the heart behind it instead of only the surface. Whatever opened the door, it caused something inside them to stop. The old story they had been telling themselves could no longer survive the new truth. And once that happened, they began revisiting everything. They remembered the times you stayed kind when you could have become cold. They remembered how you respected their space even when it hurt you. They remembered the moments you could have demanded answers but chose patience instead. They remembered that when you cared, you did not care halfway. There was sincerity in you, even when you were afraid. There was loyalty in you, even when you were uncertain where you stood. There was tenderness in you that you sometimes hid because you had learned that not everyone knew what to do with a soft heart. And suddenly, the things they once misunderstood began rearranging themselves into a completely different picture. That was when the emotion came. Not because they discovered that you were perfect. This is not about perfection. It is about realization. They began to understand that you were more genuine than they allowed themselves to believe. They saw that some of the distance between you was not caused by a lack of feeling, but by fear, timing, pride, confusion, and the painful habit of expecting rejection before love had the chance to speak clearly. They saw the possibility that while they had been waiting for you to prove something, you had been quietly wondering whether they were safe enough to receive what was already in your heart. And that realization reached a place in them they had been avoiding. My child, there is a difference between missing someone and understanding what they meant. Your soulmate may have missed you before. They may have thought of you in quiet moments. They may have remembered your face unexpectedly, heard a song and felt your presence, or found themselves wondering what you were doing. But what is happening now carries a different weight. They are not only thinking about you. They are reconsidering you. They are looking back at the connection with eyes that are no longer protected by the same assumptions. They are noticing what they overlooked, and that is why their emotions have become difficult to contain. There is one moment in particular that keeps returning to them. It was something you did that seemed small at the time. Perhaps you gave them patience when they expected pressure. Perhaps you offered kindness after they became distant. Perhaps you did not expose something they trusted you with. Perhaps you protected their dignity even while your own heart was confused. At the time, they noticed it but did not fully understand it. Now they do. Now they are seeing that moment as evidence of your character. And once they began seeing that, other memories followed behind it like doors opening one after another. They began asking themselves questions they had avoided. What if I misunderstood them? What if they cared more than I knew? What if I pushed away something real because I was afraid of how much it mattered? And then came the question that unsettled them most. What if they stopped waiting for me to understand? That question changed the atmosphere inside their heart. Not because you are meant to wait forever. You are not. Your life is not a waiting room for someone else's courage. But the possibility of losing access to your heart has forced your soulmate to look at their own hesitation differently. For a long time they thought time was endless. They believed there would always be another chance to explain, another moment to say what they really felt, another opportunity to repair whatever had become complicated. But once truth enters a person deeply, time begins to feel different. Suddenly tomorrow does not feel guaranteed. Suddenly silence no longer feels harmless. Suddenly waiting begins to look like a decision of its own. This is where their emotions became heavier. They realized you may have carried pain they never acknowledged. They imagined what it must have felt like for you to remain uncertain while they tried to understand themselves. They saw moments where you were probably waiting for clarity and received mixed signals instead. They remembered words they should have said more carefully. They remembered times when pride stopped them from reaching out. They remembered how easy it was to assume you understood what they felt, even though they never gave you enough truth to stand on. And then something inside them softened. Not dramatically. Not with some theatrical promise that everything would instantly become perfect. It happened quietly. Their resistance began losing its power. The excuses that once sounded reasonable started sounding empty. The stories they told themselves to justify distance stopped bringing comfort. They could no longer pretend that you were simply another passing connection. They could no longer place you in a convenient category and move on emotionally. The truth had made that impossible. Because what they discovered about you revealed something about themselves. They realized that part of the reason your presence affected them so deeply was because you reflected back parts of their heart they had not healed. Your honesty challenged the places where they hid. Your patience exposed their restlessness. Your emotional depth made them aware of how often they intellectualized feelings instead of allowing themselves to experience them. Your presence brought a strange sense of familiarity, and rather than trusting it, they sometimes became suspicious of it. They were used to connections that demanded performance. Your energy asked for authenticity. That difference frightened them more than they admitted. But now, something is changing. There is a conversation forming inside them before it ever becomes a conversation with you. They are practicing words in their mind. They are imagining different ways of beginning. They are wondering whether they should admit what they misunderstood or simply start by telling you what they finally understand. They are thinking about how you might respond. They are afraid you may have become tired. They are afraid you may no longer believe them. Yet beneath the fear, there is another feeling growing stronger, and this is where the story begins moving in a direction they did not expect. Courage. Not complete courage yet. But enough to disturb their silence. There is something about knowing the truth that makes pretending much harder. Before, they could hide behind uncertainty. They could tell themselves they needed more time, more signs, more proof, more distance, more clarity. Now the truth itself has become the proof. They are seeing that the real obstacle was not you. It was the fear of what loving you might require them to become. Love that is real asks people to grow. It asks them to communicate instead of disappear. It asks them to tell the truth even when the truth makes them vulnerable. It asks them to stop punishing new love for old wounds. It asks them to choose presence over pride. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that if they want access to something deeper with you, they cannot bring the same habits that created distance in the first place. And that realization is emotional because it places responsibility where it belongs. They are no longer only asking, "Do they still care about me?" They are beginning to ask, "Have I shown them that I am capable of caring for what they offered?" That question has weight. There are moments when people become emotional because they are hurt. There are other moments when they become emotional because they finally understand the value of something they nearly mishandled. What your soulmate is experiencing carries the second kind of emotion. It is not hopelessness. It is awakening. They are realizing that what existed between you was never as ordinary as they tried to make it seem. And there is another detail heaven wants this story to reveal carefully. Someone around them noticed. Your soulmate may believe they have hidden their emotions well, but someone close to them recently picked up on the change. Perhaps it was the way they went quiet when your name or a certain subject came up. Perhaps it was the way they suddenly defended you when someone misunderstood your intentions. Perhaps they were looking at their phone differently, distracted by thoughts they could not explain. Whatever happened, someone noticed that their energy shifted. And then a question was asked. A simple question. But it went directly to the place they were trying not to expose. Do you still have feelings for them? The room around them may have remained ordinary, but inside your soulmate, everything paused. Because this time, denial did not come as easily. There was a moment when they could have laughed it off. They could have changed the subject. They could have given one of those carefully vague answers people use when they want to protect themselves. But instead, something surprising happened. They hesitated. And inside that hesitation was more truth than any long explanation could have carried. The person speaking to them noticed it too. That silence revealed that the answer mattered. Your soulmate may not have confessed everything in that moment, but what they said next opened a door. They admitted that things had been more complicated than they expected. They admitted that they had been thinking about you differently. And then, almost without planning to, they shared the discovery that had shaken them. They explained that they had finally understood something about you. They talked about how they once thought you had pulled away because you did not care enough, but now they were beginning to see that you stepped back because the uncertainty was hurting you. They mentioned something you did that showed integrity. They admitted that they had judged one part of your behavior without understanding the pain behind it. The more they spoke, the more emotional their voice became, because saying the truth aloud made it more real. And the person listening did not respond the way they expected. Instead of agreeing with their old fears, this person challenged them. They said something that has remained in your soulmate's mind since then. They told them that sometimes a person stops chasing not because love disappeared, but because self-respect finally became louder than confusion. That sentence stayed. Your soulmate heard it again later when they were alone. They heard it while staring at a message they never answered properly. They heard it while remembering a moment when you became quieter. They heard it when thinking about how often you had tried to communicate without forcing anything. And suddenly they saw your silence in a way they had never seen before. Not as a punishment. Not as manipulation. As protection. My child, this is where the energy of the story changes. Because your soulmate is beginning to understand that your heart may still care, but access to your heart cannot be assumed. That truth has created urgency inside them, but it is a healthy urgency, the kind that says, if something matters, I need to stop treating it casually. They are beginning to think about action. Not just feeling. And this matters because for too long their emotions existed mostly in private. They could miss you privately. They could wonder privately. They could regret privately. But private emotion changes nothing unless it eventually becomes honest communication. Something within them now knows that. They have considered reaching out more than once. There have been moments when they opened your conversation, stared at the space where words could go, and closed it again. They wanted to say something meaningful, but every sentence sounded too small for what they were feeling. How are you? Felt dishonest because there was too much behind the question. I miss you felt too exposed. Can we talk? felt frightening because they did not know whether you would say yes. So they waited. But the waiting is becoming uncomfortable. Because now they know what they did not know before. They know you were not playing with them. They know your heart was more sincere than they allowed themselves to trust. They know some of the fears they projected onto you belonged to old experiences, not to who you actually were. And most importantly, they know that continuing to remain silent may eventually create the outcome they fear the most. They may lose the chance to be understood by you. That realization has brought them to an emotional threshold. There is a point when someone stops asking whether they are ready and starts asking whether staying silent is worth the cost. Your soulmate is moving toward that point. They are becoming less concerned with looking perfectly composed and more concerned with making sure you finally know the truth. But before that can happen, there is one more layer they must face. There is something they have not forgiven themselves for. It is connected to a moment between you that they now see differently. They remember how you looked, what you said, and perhaps most painfully, what you did not say. At the time, they thought the moment was insignificant. Now they realize you were giving them an opportunity to meet you emotionally, and they missed it. You may remember this moment too. It may have been a conversation that ended too quickly. A message where your heart was hidden between simple words. A moment when you asked whether everything was okay and secretly hoped they would tell you what they really felt. Perhaps you gave them one last opening to be honest, and instead of stepping forward, they retreated behind uncertainty. They remember. And now that memory carries a different weight. They imagine what might have happened if they had answered differently. They wonder whether one honest sentence could have changed months of confusion. They wonder whether your heart would have felt safer. They wonder whether the distance that followed could have been avoided. But heaven does not reveal the past to keep people trapped inside regret. It reveals the past so wisdom can change what happens next. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this. They cannot rewrite that moment. But they may still choose what kind of person they become after understanding it. And that is where the surprise begins. Because the next thing they are considering is not something they would have considered before. Their usual pattern would have been to wait for you to move first. Their usual instinct would have been to protect themselves by remaining vague. Their usual response would have been to hope you somehow sensed what they could not say. But now they are thinking about doing the opposite. They are thinking about becoming unmistakably clear. They are thinking about telling you exactly where they went wrong. They are thinking about admitting what they discovered. They are thinking about telling you that the truth about your heart changed something inside theirs. And there is a sentence forming in them that carries more vulnerability than anything they have said to you before. It begins with an admission. I was wrong about you. But that is not the part that has them most emotional. The part that follows is. Because once they admit they were wrong, they know they must explain what they now believe is true. And what they now believe about you is so different from their old assumption that saying it aloud may completely change the direction of this connection. They now believe you cared deeply. They believe you tried longer than they realized. They believe you were protecting something sincere when you became quiet. They believe the bond between you was real enough to frighten both of you in different ways. But there is one more belief forming in them, and it is the one they have been most afraid to face. They believe they may still love you. Not the idea of you. Not the attention you gave them. Not simply the memory. You. And once that realization entered their heart, the emotion they had been holding back finally broke through. They sat with it. They tried to reason around it. They asked themselves whether it was nostalgia, loneliness, guilt, or regret. But none of those explanations fully fit. Because nostalgia does not make someone want to become better. Loneliness does not usually make someone confront their own mistakes. Guilt alone does not make the future suddenly feel important. What they are feeling is connected to the possibility that the connection still matters, and that possibility has awakened something they thought they had buried. My beloved child, do not misunderstand this message as a command to chase, wait, or place your life on hold. Your worth does not depend on whether another person finds the courage to speak. What is meant to reach you must eventually meet you with truth, consistency, and respect. But spiritually, there are seasons when clarity arrives in one heart before it reaches the other. This appears to be one of those seasons. Your soulmate is standing at an internal doorway. Behind them is the version of themselves that remained protected through silence. Ahead of them is the possibility of honesty. They know that if they step through, they may hear an answer they cannot control. You may welcome the conversation. You may need time. You may have questions. You may have changed. That uncertainty still scares them. But for the first time, they are beginning to see that uncertainty is not a good enough reason to hide from what is true. And then, very recently, something happened that pushed them even closer to a decision. They saw or heard something connected to you. It was not necessarily dramatic. It may have been your name appearing unexpectedly, a picture, a memory, a comment from someone, or even a simple reminder of a place you once discussed. But the timing shook them because it came shortly after they had been wrestling with everything they discovered. They felt as if the question they had been avoiding was placed directly in front of them again. Are you going to keep feeling this in silence, or are you finally going to do something honest with it? And this time, they did not dismiss the question. They made a decision. A small one at first. But every large change begins with a small decision. They decided they would stop pretending they were unaffected. They decided they would stop allowing pride to rewrite the story. They decided that before more time passed, they needed to find a way to tell you what had changed inside them. And they began preparing. They thought about the words. They thought about the timing. They thought about whether to call, write, or speak face to face. They imagined your reaction so many times that it made their heart race. But there is something else they are planning to tell you, something even more surprising than the admission that they misunderstood you. It has to do with what they were thinking during the period when you believed they had moved on. Because while you may have assumed their silence meant they had stopped caring, the truth is more complicated. There was a moment during that silence when they came very close to reaching out. They had already chosen the words. They had already made a decision. And then something happened that stopped them. Something you do not know about. Something that changed the timing of everything. And now, After discovering the truth about you, they are finally ready to reveal what happened in that moment, why they disappeared when they almost came forward, and what they are preparing to do now that the secret behind their silence can no longer remain hidden.